Hello there. I'm Michael. Welcome to the Messianic Misfits.
Shabbat Shalom.
So last week there was a question or a comment, and there was an email sent out regarding, I guess, in Christianity there's a belief that when you die you go to heaven. And in Hebrew Roots movement, or anything that is likened to that movement, there's a belief that when you die, you are sleeping, waiting for the resurrection. There's got to be something going on with one of those views. I, for one, was raised as a Christian, believing in judgment after death and either heaven or destruction. There's some verses that we touched on that actually support it. They're found in the Brit Hadashah, in the Messianic writings, which is heavily leaning towards, in John, as a matter of fact, that when you die, there's a resurrection. If you die in Messiah, it's to life. If you die outside of Messiah, it's to judgment. And there's one verse that specifically says that, and I forget what it is now, but we can probably go back to the previous video and see that. But what I want to do, what I'm trying to do, is to delve into that topic and to see whether or not it has support, one way or the other, no matter what it says, from what's known as the Old Testament. If anyone at all in that book or in those writings believed in something other than just sleeping to the resurrection. Now we know that there's verses such as the dead know nothing, or and then there's one resurrection, and so everyone who dies is waiting. And there's all these ideas that come from just a couple verses. But what is the collective thought among the believers who actually compiled the scriptures? What is their thought? It's easy for us to have an opinion based on our culture and our past and take a few verses and to make them fit into our view. But instead of doing that, what I want to try to do is to look at the verses apart from my preconceived view to see what exactly are the people in there saying. What do they believe? And is it possible that my developed view from this Western culture may be a little bit off, based on what's written? So this is not at all going to be conclusive because I've only started this, but I'll share what I have so far. Because basically, if there's even one mention of anything that even seems remotely resemblance to the fact that there could be something after death immediately, then I think it deserves a fair look. So, what I've done is I'll just read from this. It explains what I've done. So, soul and spirit mentions in scriptures. I've heard people have said that the soul and the spirit are two different things. People have said that the soul is one thing while the spirit's something else. And I'm not going to get into all that today. I'm just going to look at what the scriptures say. That's it. And if anybody watching this wants to get into that or make a comment about that, that's fine. I'm not at all saying that this is it or this is the way. This is the beginning of my study, and I'm sharing it. That's it. So soul and spirit mentions in scriptures. Are the dead only sleeping, or is there something after death for the believer as expressed in the Messianic writings? Is this idea of Greek origin, as so many have declared, or has something been missed? In Genesis 4:10, we see, "And the Lord said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood cries to me from out of the ground."
Mama needs. Mama needs you, Papa.
Okay, hang on. 1 second, guys. I am needed for just a moment. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
All right, let me see something about my sound. All right, so we're going to look at soul first, okay? Isaac on his deathbed, okay? And all this is just pointing out what was his opinion about what a soul is? Let's see. Because we know that in scriptures, in the creation of man, Yah breathed the breath of life into man, and he became a living soul, right? That's what we see. So Genesis 27:4, "And make me meats as I like them, and bring them to me that I may eat. that my soul may bless thee before I die. In 27:19, and Jacob said to his father, I, Esau, thy firstborn, have done as thou toldest me. Rise, sit, and eat of my venison, that thy soul may bless me. In verse 25, and he said, bring hither, and I will eat of thy venison, son, that my soul may bless thee. And he brought it near to him, and he ate. And he brought him wine, and he drank. Verse 31, and he also made meats and brought them to his father. And he said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's venison, that thy soul may bless me. So the soul of the father is going to bless the son. So I don't think that's not enough to be conclusive yet, but let's hear what happens when Rebecca is bearing Benjamin. And in the Brenton Septuagint, it reads this way, and it came to pass in her giving up the ghost, for she was dying, that she called his name the son of my pain, but his father called his name Benjamin. In English Standard Version, it reads, and as her soul was departing, for she was dying, she called his name Benani, but his father called him Benjamin. And in the King James, it reads, and it came to pass, as her soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Benani, but his father called him Benjamin. And so in this particular account, the soul departing from the flesh is described here as dying, physical dying.
What verse is that?
Genesis chapter 35, verse 18.
35, verse 18. Okay.
And there's tons of more verses that are just as conclusive as this one. And this is as far as I got. And I looked at some of the Hebrew words and the nefesh and nephash, and I just began doing the word study this morning, and then I was pulled away from it. But that one verse right there is enough reason for me to want to look at it more.
So, do you have a theory at this point?
Well, based on the New Testament and the in consideration of the second coming happening in 70 AD and the judgment as well, and we're now living in a new heavens and new earth, and the New Testament writings being authoritative, based on those conditions, then yes, I do have an opinion. But I'm not rigid in that opinion because I'm still studying it out and seeking it out. But it's everything is it's kind of like having that last piece to the puzzle. Not last piece, but another piece to the puzzle, where you might have had the piece before, but it was turned the wrong direction and it wouldn't fit. And all I've done is just taken that piece, and the Father has taken that piece and rotated it just slightly so it fits. And when it fits, it completes a circuit, and all these other things begin to work. And so now, for me, this book was one of the catalysts, but some of the videos that you shared, Kay, really got me thinking a different way about all these future prophecies. And all we ever do when we try to study these things out in scriptures is we try to divorce ourselves from our preconceived ideas and try to understand the perspective of the writer, right? What was the writer convicted of? What did they feel? What did they think? Because here's the common Christian or doctrinal position on these things, is that the first century believers, they believed that the words in the scriptures meant what they said, that it was going to be short, coming soon. Judgment was going to come very soon. They believed all that, but they were wrong. The people who walked with the Messiah were wrong. They were mistaken. But we're right. Well, I think that is a little bit, I don't know. I think I think that would be us thinking too highly of ourselves. How much more would we maybe understand possibly if we actually had the man living, breathing, and walking among us who actually did commune with the Father and who was called his son? So how can we think less of them and more of our own opinions when they were right there with him? You know, so I think that it's very important for us to humble ourselves beyond what we've ever considered and let go of the fear that's associated with going away from what's comfortable and just go and see where it takes you. And if it takes you somewhere that leads to better understanding, then so be it. And if it turns out to be false, then dismiss it and move on. We're not obligated to develop a new opinion just for the sake of a new opinion by any means. But we are certainly responsible for studying out if we have any inkling of a possibility of being in error, then we have to seek out the truth. We have to. There's only one truth. Now, that's a whole nother topic. There's only one truth because we're all different and we're all unique. And so the Father can speak to each of us in a different way to reveal that truth, right? So we learned also that it says the Father, his purpose is never changing. But a lot of people take that to mean that he never changes, but he does change. He relents. He was going to judge them in the desert and kill all of them because of the golden calf. But when there was a prayer going out on their behalf, he decided not to. And so he changed in that moment. But his purpose never did change. His purpose is never changing.
Mm-hmm.
Shabbat shalom, Niels.
Shabbat shalom, Niels. Good to see you here.
Hello. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Right on time.
We haven't really started yet. We're just talking about soul and spirit in the Old Testament, and I haven't really gotten.
So, Michael, I looked at that verse, Genesis 35, verse, is it 18? 18, yes. And it's interesting how the KJV differs from my translation. The scriptures translation says, and it reads this way, and it came to be as her life was going out, or she died, that she called his name Ben Oni. So life. And then I looked up in Bible Hub, I looked up that word in Hebrew. So although it is from Nefesh, but the form here is Napsa, which is a different form of the word Nefesh, because sometimes they have, but it's from Nefesh. It's Napsa. And looking at the occurrences in scripture of that particular form of Nefesh, translations would go like her soul, herself. Herself is repeated a lot, although the KJV says soul, her soul, but like in the interlinear and in the NAS, which is probably American Standard Translation, it's herself instead of her soul, which is just, something to look at. Very interesting. Self and nefesh can also mean life. So this can also be translated as life instead of soul, because sometimes, yes, the word soul is really, for me, it creates so many confusion because of the doctrines that go with that, the indoctrination that goes with that word. So when it says life, her life was going out, that paints a different picture again, right? Whereas when we say her soul was going out, or you know what I mean? Like for me, at least, it paints two different pictures: her life going out versus her soul going out.
I got a question for you.
Okay.
Look at Isaiah chapter 26, verse 9.
Isaiah, okay, Isaiah 26.
I want to.
Isaiah 26, verse 9.
Yep.
Okay.
This one was really interesting to me.
With my soul, I have desired you in the night. I'm just reading like the literal interlinear translation.
Okay.
So with my soul, and the Hebrew would be napsi, which is different. And the occurrences, first occurrence of napsi will be Genesis 12:13, which is translated here as with, for my sake and my soul, my life, he, soul, life, soul, desire, love.
What stood out to me about this verse, Kay, is it mentions both soul and spirit.
Are two different things. Would you agree? I mean, soul and spirit are two different things.
I don't know if Isaiah thought so. He says, yeah, in the way of thy judgments, O Lord, we have waited for thee. The desire of our soul is to thy name.
It's like
Verse 9, with my soul have I desired thee in the night. Yeah, with my spirit within me, I seek thee early. So it could be the same thing in his mind.
well, it could be like, I'll try something like from what I'm thinking right now, like with my life, I have desired you in the night. Yes, by my mind within me, I seek you early, or when blah, blah, blah. So like with my life, I have desired you in the night. Yes, by my mind within me, I will seek you early.
Now check this out. Now go to Ecclesiastes 3:21.
Ecclesiastes.
Really, from 16 to 22 is a good.
Ecclesiastes 3. Okay. Verse what?
16 through 22.
16 to 22. Maybe I should go this one too. Moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment there, wickedness, and the place of righteousness there, iniquity, sad in my heart, and the righteous, the wicked, shall judge God for a time, for every purpose.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Niels.
1 Thessalonians 5:23.
Where is there's chronic? Wait. I'm not seeing what you point out.
So verse 21. Who knows whether the spirit of a man goes upwards and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth?
Yes, that is not in conflict with what we have been talking about last week, the spirit, because it's a spirit that comes from the Father, right?
Yep.
But it's not the soul. It's not the nefesh. It says ruach. This is it. The word is ruach, and
Ruach is the spirit, the word spirit.
so it's this ruach It's interesting how animals also have ruach, right?
Yeah.
And it goes down to the earth. The breath of the animals, they go down to earth, and that from man goes back to the Father.
The breath.
Hey, Niels, what's that verse you said again? 1 Thessalonians what?
5:23. Here you see all three. And it uses the word "and" in between, of course. In Hebrew, you don't have "and" or commas or semicolons.
Yeah, but because of Kelly's inquiry, I was trying to only use Old Testament to explain these things, because this is all Greek. But this is a good verse. And may your whole spirit and soul and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. And so this is a good example.
1 Thessalonians what? Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of people in the world think that the soul is a spirit, something you have. But it's not something you have, it's something you are.
I've heard that.
It's what you become. Yeah. So here we see the part also, and body.
Wait, which what
1
chapter and verse?
Thessalonians 5:23, Kelly. I mean, okay.
I'm sorry.
5:23.
1 Thessalonians 5:23.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Is it possible then to conclude that the soul is a union between the body and the spirit? Because it shows here that the body.
That's a soul. That's what I think. It's the living, the entire, living being. You have
Well, remember, the spirit returns unto him who gave it.
Yeah.
But the soul, living, breathing creature that you are, that sins shall die or cease to exist. It's not something, this is not Socrates here, the immortal soul, no such thing. Basically, that's Socrates or Greek mythology. So we see here that the spirit returns, although that's what a lot of people think the soul is, but it's not something that you possess. It's what he has given you, and he takes it back, as we're told. It goes upward. It returns to him, which gives us our intellect, which gives us his intelligence of knowing and understanding, developing, and adding, subtracting, having a mind, of intelligence. It's his. It belongs to him. He's going to take it back. And then the body just returns to death thou art, thou shalt return.
Yep. So then what I'm trying to do here, and what I've been trying to do is, because all these things that you're saying, Niels, I get it. And these are all, because in the Old Testament we hear that when he made man, he breathed life into his breath into the nostrils, and he became a living soul. The man became a living soul. He didn't receive a living soul. I get it. And so these are ideas that I've entertained, that I understand, and I think that everybody here is in agreement with right now. But what I'm trying to do is, instead of taking one verse and applying it everywhere, I'm trying now to revisit everything and question all the things that I currently do find to be true, just not so that I can prove them wrong, but so that I can see, or try at least to see by the will of the Father, if there's anything that I may have misunderstood or overlooked. And so what you're pointing out, Niels, is great stuff. And I would agree with you here, especially about the soul, especially right now in my understanding. But just because I understand something to be true doesn't mean it is. And so I'm trying the best that I can to revisit these things. And this book that we've been discussing has really shaken up some of my deep-seated, I think, issues that I would have never thought that I'd consider something different. And so whenever that happens, because it's happened several times in the last 6-7 years, whenever it happens, I go through a process. And that process has gotten more and more easy for me to deal with. But that process for me involves revisiting all the scriptures that caused me to have the position that I currently have. so that I can consider them from the new perspective that I'm considering. And that's what I've been doing with this. And so with this spirit and soul thing, it's clear to me that in the New Testament, the people who wrote it, whether they were influenced by Socrates or Plato's thought or whatever the case, that they're talking about something that involves something after we die, or after they die, because they were writing to each other, not to us. And what I've sought to do here was to find in the Old Testament where there's any future looking towards anything after death. And I know Abraham was looking forward to Messiah's time, and we learn in the New Testament that he did see it. And so the idea that the author presents in this book, and not just this author, but thousands of people, which Kay pointed out with a term called preterism, is looking at the alleged future prophecies and marrying them to historical events and taking the word for what it says in the New Testament whenever the judgments were short to come or at hand or all these other things, and all the different things that line up with the second coming, and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, as well as the resurrection. Now, we're not going to get to it today, but there's a section in this book, and I don't know if you guys have read it yet, but it's just after the section we're going to look at today. It's called The Timing of the Resurrection, and it's by no means exhaustive, but there's enough in here to raise eyebrows and to at least ask questions. And so what I want to do here, I think we should go ahead and get into Yahusha's substitutionary death. And what I would ask everyone to do is we're not trying to prove a point here. We're not trying to debate. We're not trying to say, well, but this one says that and that one says this, because that'll take hours. And we don't have hours. So all we're trying to do is look at what this book says, The Last Enemy and the Triumph of Christ, and consider it the possibility of the possibility of maybe it's true. Now, I'll say that in my notes, I've kind of gone a little different route than this author did, because he's clearly talking about things that we don't agree with, and I don't think that's a problem, because his conclusions are not contingent upon his initial belief. He may think that they are, but they're not. And so all I'm attempting to do here is to explain what this book purports and consider what it has to say in all humbleness. Now, it's easy to hold on to my current convictions and try to debunk this book, but I would encourage you to not do that just yet, and to consider it all the way through before attempting to prove it wrong. Because if we hold on to what we currently understand every step of the way, then we will never, ever have hope for anything further, ever. So there's no danger here, because the Father is the one who delivers all understanding, and to each one of us in our own hearts and minds, and he has ultimate power and authority over all of us. And I give him all the authority in my life and only my life, and I ask for him to give me the words to speak, and that I don't speak out of turn or against anything that he has in plan, in store. So that said, let me pull up this document. I just continued on to the other document we started on. And I actually started going into the timing of the resurrection, but we're not even going to touch it today, because it's so long. I want to do a much better job at breaking it down. So we're going to start now on Yahusha's substitutionary death on page 31 of the book. And it's interesting to me that it starts with Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. We have therefore a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Yahusha Messiah, the Son of Elohim. Let us remain firm in his faith. For we do not have a high priest who cannot share our infirmities, but we have one who was tempted with everything as we are, and yet without sin, or without sinning. Let us therefore come openly to the throne of his grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. The author points out that Yahushua never sinned, and that's debatable in some circles. But for me, I'll go as far as to say is that I know that when he was offered, he was without blemish, that he was a perfect offering, and that he was innocent and tried as guilty for our sake. And I believe that Isaiah 53 talks about him, and if anybody's interested, they can go read that in consideration of Yahushua, what he did for us, and be moved or not. Also in 1 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 21 through 22, for to this you were called, because Messiah also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. And that's also referenced in Isaiah 53:9, if anyone wants to go there in their own time. John 8:55, John 15:10, 2 Corinthians 5:21, and 1 John 3:5. We're not going to go to all those places here. I only mention them so that anyone watching this may be able to get the references. And a footnote, really quick for everyone here. Anytime I find a quote in the New Testament about a verse in the Old Testament, there's something that the Scriptures translation does that I don't agree with. In the New Testament, in the Scriptures translation, they change the wording to match the Messyanic text of the Old Testament. And they notate it, and they let you know that's what they're doing. But I don't like that, because the Messyanic text is not the most perfect copy of those verses. And we find that every single instant that we find where the Old Testament is quoted in the New, the Septuagint agrees word for word with the quotation, which tells me that it's very plausible that those who were writing the Old Testament actually had the manuscript that predates the Messyanic, which the Septuagint comes from. So I'm not the first one to say that. It's all over the place. Research it and check it out. It's interesting. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 17 through 23. And if you call on the Father, who without partiality judges according to each one's work, pass the time of your sojourning in fear, knowing that you were redeemed from your futile behavior, inherited from your fathers, not with what is corruptible, silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Mashiach, as of a man unblemished and spotless, foreknown indeed before the foundation of the world, but manifested in these last times for your sake. Now I want to point out that verse. When was 1 Peter written? Does anybody know what century it was written in? Because first Peter here, he says, foreknown indeed before the foundation of the world, but manifested in these last times. Well, how many last times are there? Right? In the Scriptures, when in these kinds of writings, we hear references to the last times. In the last times, which is the time of the tribulation, the last times. Well, from Peter's perspective, he was in the last times. It says it right there. In these last times for your sakes. Who through him believe in Elohim, who raised him from the dead and gave him esteem, so that your belief and expectation are in Elohim. Now that you have cleansed your lives in obeying the truth through the Spirit and unfeigned brotherly love, love one another fervently with a clean heart, having been born again, not of corruptible seed, but incorruptible, through the living word of Elohim, which remains forever. Also see Isaiah 53:6. We all, like sheep, went astray. Each one of us has turned to his own way, and Yahuwah has laid on him the crookedness of us all. Isaiah 53:6 here All we as sheep have gone astray. Everyone has gone astray in his way. And the Lord gave him up for our sins. 53, 8-12. In his humiliation, his judgment was taken away. Who shall declare his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth. Because of the iniquities of my people, he was led to death. And I will give the wicked for his burial, and the rich for his death. For he practiced no iniquity, nor craft was in his mouth. The Lord also is pleased to purge him from his stroke. If ye can give an offering for sin, your souls shall see a long-lived seed. The Lord is also pleased to take away from the travail of his soul, to shew him light, and to form him with understanding, to justify the just one who serves many well. And he shall bear their sins. Therefore he shall inherit many, and he shall divide the spoils of the mighty, because his soul was delivered to death, and he was numbered among the transgressors, and he bore the sins of many, and was delivered because of their iniquities. Now that says a lot, but I'm just trying to bring out some of the points, as the author did as well. We're going to jump to Romans chapter 6 here. And we can, if anybody wants to stop and talk about anything, just say something and I'll stop. I just kind of want to get through some of this.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, if we can go back a little bit to the beginning of the what beginning of page 31, where it says that so he's saying that he's stating the clear fact that Jesus never sinned, and then it puts forth all these verses. So do you agree with what he's saying, that these verses actually support the clear fact that Jesus never sinned? Like, for instance, he quoted
I don't.
15, 1 Peter 2, 21 and 22, and then 1 Peter 1, verse 19. So do you or do you not agree with what he's saying here?
I do not agree with his presuppositions.
Okay, so it's good to make that clear. And why? Like, for instance, with because like Hebrews 4:15 seem to be saying that, you know, and you have explained that one well. What about 1 Peter 2, verse 21 to 22? Because it says, like, and it's in all caps, who committed no sin, or was deceit found in his mouth.
Right. Now this reference right here. For this, for to this you were called, because Messiah also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. Who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. Now, he was accused, right? He was accused of something that he was not guilty of. And yet it did not drive him to sin. It did not cause him to sin. How many of us here, if we're accused of something that we did not do and we're going to face death, how many of us would curse the ones who made the accusation, or try to prove them wrong, or try to weasel our way out of the punishment? How many of us would do that? He didn't do that.
Just you?
Another thing that I'm excited about, when I was just, simple and careful reading of this verse, very simple and careful reading. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. Committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. So for me, what it's saying, simple and careful reading, is we should be, he called us for something, and leaving as an example, we should follow his footstep. And what is his steps? What should we be following? Committing no sin, no deceit found in his mouth. We should be following that same example that he left us. right? It's not saying that he is sinless, that, it's a purified. What this verse is saying to me is we should be following his example, because this is what we were called to do. This is the anointing. If you're called and you said yes to that calling, then you are chosen, you're anointed. And then we should be following his example, which is committing no sin and having no deceit found in our mouth. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense, and that's very well put. I think that common Christian doctrine demands that the Messiah was born of a virgin and that he was part God, part man, and that he was perfect and never committed any sin. But the Bible does not demand those things. The words in the scriptures do not demand those things of our Messiah. And so all the people here on this group, and there's another study that I highly recommend that Kerry Weigel put out about the virgin birth doctrine. It's awesome. It's mind-blowing. And if anyone has any issues or concerns or questions about that, then please visit that study. www.Messyanic.com. You can find it there. It's great. Once that paradigm for me was destroyed or shifted to be what I believe is more in line with what the Bible teaches, all these other things kind of took shape from my own ideas, but from what the words actually say. And so we don't have to have a Hercules to be our Savior. We don't need Hercules. We already have Yahusha, and he's good enough. He was a man who was anointed from above, called the Son of the Most High. And him being the Son of the Most High is a spiritual son, just as he says we are also sons. Does that mean that my mother was visited by an angel and was impregnated by the set-apart Spirit? No, it's not physical. So yeah, that's a good point. We are called to walk as he walked, just as James says. So that's good.
These were black.
But I do have a question, though, regarding 1 Peter chapter 1. Because when I tried reading the whole chapter at the very least, verse 19 to 21 seemed to be like I was having a hard time understanding this part, but now that I think about it more, and remember when you said, Michael, before, how blood and life are interchangeable?
Yeah.
And so it says here, I'll read it. I'll start with 17. And if you call on the Father, who without partiality judges according to each one's work, has the time of your sojourning here, knowing that you were redeemed from your futile behavior inherited from your fathers, not with what is corruptible, silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Messiah, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, foreknown indeed before the foundation of the world, but manifested in these last times for your sakes, who through him believe in Elohim, who raised him from the dead and gave him esteem, so that your belief and expectation are in Elohim. So when I replace that word blood with life, we were not redeemed with silver or gold, with anything corruptible. We are redeemed with something more than that. Now, redemption, that idea of redemption, being saved, that was pointed out, in verse 9. Wait, hold on. Verse 9. Oh, okay, here. that's why it's good to read the entire chapter, because, oh my goodness, verse 8, it says, whom having not seen you love, in whom you exalt with unspeakable and esteemed joy, yet not seeing but believing, obtaining the goal of your belief. And what is the goal of your belief? A deliverance of lives. Like deliverance of lives, deliverance of souls. Like that is the whole goal of our faith, being a light to others, not just the deliverance of our life, but being able to deliver others also, and that they may also experience resurrection from the dead.
Yeah, now I do want to point out something here, Kay. I'm glad you brought this verse up, because in the New Testament, whenever the word soul is used, from the Greek perspective, it could also mean spirit. Just so you know, if you look at,
but in the Greek, the Greek has two words also, pneuma and psyche.
yeah, well, this one is suke, or whatever it is. This one here.
Suke. And that makes sense. Suke, yeah, suke. And that makes sense because it's delivering of lives. And then the spirit follows later. The renewing of the mind, the renewing of that spirit will follow later. After, because first you have to repent and to acknowledge that before the Father that you have sinned and you want to get right back with him. And then that's when he starts, and that's when he pours out his spirit upon you, right? So it's the precious life of the Messiah, how he lived, how he shed light to the Father's ways and his wonderful word, and he showed us that example, that amazing example. That is the one that's delivered, that is delivering us from our death, like from our spiritual death. That's how I understand this now. That's why we are redeemed by his precious blood, his life.
Yeah, think about that. What happens if you lose your blood? What happens if all the blood's drained out of your body? What happens?
And you die physically.
Yeah. And so he sacrificed that for us, his life. He walked and he lived his life according to the will of the Father every day. And then he surrendered it.
Mm-hmm.
But he surrendered his spirit to his Father, right?
Yes.
To you I commend my spirit.
Mm-hmm. And that was like right before he physically died.
Right.
So I'm thinking like the same way that, like, for instance, when you lay down your life and your children see what that looks like, the chances of them being delivered, being redeemed from, is huge, right? Like they will see that, they will follow that. So it's this idea of laying down our lives, dying to ourselves, and then that's when the Father is able to work through us, in us, and then we become a lighted bulb, and then so because I'm just trying to explain this and not see it from a Christian perspective about the crucifixion, that Jesus had to be crucified so that we will be redeemed from our sins, because I know this is not what it's talking about. Shabbat Shalom, Tremaine.
Oh, Shabbat Shalom.
Good to see you, finally. You were missing in action last week.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for,
I had the babies while Michael studied with y'all. So
I know the wind beneath is that wind beneath the wings?
or one part of the body. Yep, all same types of analogies.
Yes, she's my big toe. She keeps me falling over.
Yeah.
Me.
He say, hey, hey,
Hey,
say hey.
you should have seen him come walking in here earlier. She saw him walking in here. He was off.
He's funny. But I'm just passing through, so come on, you too. Come on with me. Yeah. You need to.
So that's all right. That's all right.
She'll be back. She'll be back.
Okay. Unless Michael is so distracted by, you know, Tremaine's presence and loveliness.
Yep. She's my lovely wife.
Yes. Look how speechless he is.
I'm captivated. All right. Let me shake it off. All right. So certainly each one of these.
Yeah, so I just brought that up because I just want to clarify that I don't believe in this Jesus substitutionary death, that this part of the book, that I think we can easily explain, put forth a different explanation of the passages that he wrote here.
Let me tell you my so I'm kind of glad you said that, because I wasn't even thinking of that. But there was a substitutionary death. There has to be. But it's not the physical death. The substitutionary death is he was spiritually, he surrendered his spirit. He was spiritually dead, because if you read it, he went down and then he went up. When he went down, he conquered it, and then he went up. So there had to be, because remember what the death of Adam is. The death of Adam is a spiritual death. And the Messiah had to confront that and challenge it and win and prevail over it for the spiritual resurrection. And so the substitutionary death was not physical death, because if it were physical death, then we would not physically die now if we believed in him. But we do. The resurrection is spiritual. Therefore, the substitutionary death was also spiritual. And on the third day, he was restored from that state and redeemed and resurrected, because there was no fault found in him. And he is our hope. Okay.
So where does that concept come from in the Old Testament?
Well, Isaiah 53, he died for our transgressions. He suffered. He was bruised. He was pierced. All these things he did for us.
Oh, yes. It's good you brought that up, because Isaiah 53, before I used to think that, this is about Jesus. It's about Jesus or the Messiah, whoever that was going to be. But if you read, start from at least 52, it doesn't seem to say that, not pointing exactly at Jesus or at Yahusha himself, but it seems to be talking about something else. And this is why I'm not clear. It does mention my servant, and it seemed to be talking about, because he was talking to Israel at that time in 52. He was talking about them. He was pertaining to them as his servant collectively. And then all of a sudden, there seems to be a shift and talking about one particular person. So that part is, I find it confusing.
Now that person was a he. When Israel is always referred to as a she. So also, there's also stuff in the book of Daniel that point to that point to the Messiah and what he would do for us. There's stuff all over the Psalms. And so there's a video that I've seen that does a much better explanation of talking about that stuff. And I'll send it to you guys.
Okay.
So you can check it out, because it's a very, all these things that we're talking about are very, very, very deeply woven. And so the difficult task now for us is that there's at least 5 different theories surrounding all these verses that we're reading right now, at least. And it's
okay.
Yes.
Job 14, 10 through 15. Job 14, 10 through 15.
Okay. Wait, hold on. Can we joke?
Job 14, 10 through 15.
Okay. May I read that? But man dies and is powerless, and man expires, and where is he? Water disappears from the sea, and a river dries up and is parched, and man shall lie down and not rise till the heavens are no more. They awake not, nor are aroused from their sleep. If only you would hide me in Sheol, conceal me until your wrath turns away. Set for me a law and remember me. If a man dies, would he live again? All the days of my struggle I wait, till my change comes. You would call, and I would answer you. You have yearned for the work of your hands. What is the change that he is waiting for?
He's waiting for the call. He's asking, if a man dies, will he live again? Well, all of my appointed days in the grave will I wait till my change comes. You will call, in other words, I shall hear your voice, and I will answer you, basically, because you have a desire for the work of your hands. He molds us like clay.
Does your translation actually say all the days of my appointed time in the grave? Because mine doesn't say that.
Mine.
Well, I'm looking at Young's literal and King James side by side.
Let me see.
Which verse is that?
14.
14.
It's mine says all the days of my struggle I wait.
And Young's literal says, if a man dieth, doth he revive? All days of my warfare I wait. Till my change come.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Young's literal. And then King James says, if a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait till my change comes. So it doesn't say grave in either one of those. So I'm not.
No, but you read it up previously.
No, I read Young's literal, and it says,
All that in Sheol, thou wouldest conceal me and hide me
does the Hebrew say
till
Sheol?
the thundering of thine anger.
oh, that in Sheol thou wouldest conceal me, hide me till the turning of thine anger. Set me for a limit and remember me. Okay, so I can understand this to mean that he would be dead during the judgment. So whenever the judgment would happen, that he'd be dead, waiting for that to be over.
Because this is Job.
Yeah, and this was written before.
Yes.
This was written before Genesis.
And he's basically saying, hey, if a man dies, he wastes away. A man gives up the spirit, and where is he? The spirit returns to the Father. And then it talks about waters that fell from the sea, and the flood decays and dries up. So a man lies down in the grave, basically, and rises not till the heavens be no more. They shall not awake, because they're what? They're asleep, nor be raised out of their sleep. Oh, that thou wouldest hide me in the grave. Now, this is King James.
Yeah,
That thou wouldest kept me a secret until thy wrath be past. The Lord Lord's wrath of the end times, that thou wouldest appoint me a set time and remember me. Well, he remembers him, of course, because he's going to call him, and I will answer you, because you have a desire for the work of your hands, because you've worked with me, you formed me, like it has every human being who's ever been called and works with him. Yep. Anyway, I thought that kind of held a lot of the speculation of what we're discussing here, and I kept thinking, where is this at? Where is this at? And then I remembered it was in Job, so I brought that up. I thought that would answer a lot of questions as far as what Job is asking, thinking, and saying.
So what are you saying, Niels, that how do you understand these verses?
How I understand these verses, I try to let them speak for themselves. It looks like it works out with the rest of the other scriptures in the Tanakh and in the New Testament also. When it comes to as far as when you die, you sleep, and you're waiting a resurrection, because he doesn't call until after.
Because I don't see
when everything is done and his wrath is done, and the Lord's wrath before he returns, he just basically wipes out everything. Man's going to just learn his lesson, and then he returns and he calls with a shout, with the trumpet, and he will answer like everyone else will. This mortal must put on immortality.
It doesn't say any of that here. Like,
No, I'm paraphrasing right now. Paraphrasing, throwing in what I've learned through the years of the Old Testament and the New Testament.
Oh, okay.
But what he's saying here in Young's Literal and King James, I'm just kind of paraphrasing what it looks like, and broken down in simple English. But the King James looks pretty understanding, because he's asking, but a man dies and wastes away, dust thou shalt return. I know that's not in there. It's just, I'm paraphrasing what the verse 10 is saying. The man gives up the spirit. Where is he? So a man lies down and rises not till the heavens be no more. And then that's when he'll rise. They shall not awake nor be out of their sleep, because death is like sleep. And that I would hide in my grave, or in the grave, and who would keep me a secret until your wrath is be past. And that wouldst appoint me a set time and remember me when he calls, basically, which is down in verse 15. So if a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait, where? In the grave, sleeping, waiting till what? His change comes, when he puts on immortality. For we shall see him like he is. That's paraphrasing. For we shall be like him, glorified. Because you what? Will call. And with a shout and a loud voice, he descends and comes back when he sets up his kingdom. That's paraphrasing. And I will answer you, back to the verse 15. Because what? You have a desire for the work of your hands, that you work with me as your works here on the earth. That's what he does with each one of us.
So, interesting thought. Something that just recently came to my mind is that when we look in the scriptures and we hear that death is likened to sleep, consider when that was written. Was it written before or after the resurrection of the Messiah? And I would venture to say that every single moment, every single word that's written in that context is written before the judgment, before the Messiah, and also before 70 AD. So Job certainly lived before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And what he's saying here, and this is my perspective of this, my new perspective of this, a man dieth and become weak and may expire, and where is he? So where is he? Where is the essence of that man? Where is he? His flesh is dead and in the ground, and he's rotting. Waters have gone away from a sea, and the river becomes waste and dry. A man hath lain down and riseth not. So that man's dead in the ground, and he's not getting up. Till the wearing out of the heavens, they awake not. nor are roused. Now, I'm curious to see that word man. What word is that? Let's just take a look and see if we can figure it out. So man, which is ish, a man as an individual or a male person, often used as an adjunct to more definite term, in such case frequently not expressed in translation.
Is this verse 10?
12. Oh, 10 is a different word.
And 14 is a different word.
So this cannot be, this whole section that you just read, Niels, is a study in itself.
Yeah.
Because the things that you're connecting it to, they're interesting, but they're actually, if we take these words, if I take these words for what they say, all those things that you're referencing them to, they're not there. No offense to you, but they're just not there. We have to read that into the text in order for it to be there. And it can fit if we do that, but we don't have to do that. We can just let it say what it says. So man lieth down and riseth not. So that word man is ish, and in the prior verse 10, the word man is geber.
In verse 10, there are two Hebrew words for man. There's geber and there's Adam.
So there's all different kinds of words for man. So what is the real deal here? Let me look at another translation and see if it's any different.
This is really helpful, Niels. I'm really glad you brought this verse up, this passage up. Oh wow.
Okay, Acts 2:29.
Well, no, I'm not ready to leave this one yet.
No, I'm actually talking about only Old Testament sleep. But in Acts 2:29, brethren, just permit me to speak freely unto you concerning our David, patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is among us today, to this day. Now, there was a big controversy between the Pharisees and the Sadducees who didn't believe in the resurrection. So he was bringing his point up in Acts, that, hey, you're going to die. You're going to be dead and buried, just like David is. He's still there in the grave.
They didn't say he's still there in the grave. They said his tomb is still there. And I'd venture to say that Yahushua's tomb is still there as well.
Well, he both died and was buried.
And was buried. Yes, that is true.
Yeah. So it didn't say he died and then became alive.
Doesn't say that he died and he's still laying there either.
And then you look down in verse 32 that Yeshua did Yahuwah raise up. But we're not talking. The point here is I'm saying is for David did not go up into the heavens, verse 34. Only Yeshua. For David himself, who was died, buried in his tomb today, did not go up into the heavens.
When was that written, Niels? When was it written? Before or after 70 AD?
What was written after 70 AD?
I'm asking
Was anything written after 70 AD?
I'm asking you a question.
I'm asking you too. Is anything written after 70 AD?
Yeah, there's things about after 70 AD, which is in the book of Revelations. Is a lot of that's after 70 AD. The point is, the point that I'm trying to make here, Niels, is I understand that the things that you point out. I think we all kind of do, and it's good that you point them out so it can come up in this discussion. But for you to make statements like, therefore, this means that, and this has to mean this, is a little bit disingenuous, because just because you have a perspective on a certain verse or a certain idea in scriptures based on your experience and all this, your experience is very much appreciated and it's valuable, just as Kay's is and mine is and all of ours is. But the point here is not to make declarations as though it's the only plausible possibility, because that's not the case. If it were, then everyone would believe that. And so
I'm all I'm doing is reading it. I'm not breaking it down or looking it up in Greek and Hebrew for each little word or something. Right now, all I'm doing is just reading it and coming to a simple surmise of what it looks appears, can be saying, not that it is saying, or it might not be that way, where a witness of 2 or 3 scriptures are line upon line, precept upon precept, they can probably explain themselves. But it looks and it appears and it says basically what other scriptures are saying, that a man dies, he's going to wait in the grave until Yeshua returns to set up the kingdom here on this earth.
Right.
And people, they're woken from a physical death, sleep. The next thing you know, consciously, because you don't know when you go to bed at night and you wake up the next morning, all the time that passed by. That's why it's so similar to sleep. To answer your question, the book of Acts is probably written around 80 to 100 AD. So it would have been after 70 AD.
I'm not sure that's true.
Okay, Google Acts and Gospel of Luke make up a 2-part work, Luke and Acts, by the same anonymous author, usually dated around 80 to 90 AD.
Right.
I was saying 100. First part, Gospel of Luke, tells us how God fulfilled his plan in the works and salvation through the life and death and resurrection of Yeshua of the Nazareth as the promised Messiah. So it would have been afterwards. Now, how could he write it afterwards if the temple and most of Jerusalem was destroyed? And what or who would have been the author, as it's mentioning here, that the anonymous author?
It appears to me,
it's just Wikipedia.
yeah, some of this stuff, what I'm learning, Niels, is that the popular the popular consensus is very biased. And there's a lot of things that were left covered that were not uncovered. And if you do a really extensive, I would say a heavy consideration for the preterist view on the book of Acts, the book of Revelations, the book of Matthew 24, all these different things, then you will hear very devout people who love the Father and the Messiah, who have dedicated their life to study, who have also read these same verses that you're pointing out. And in my opinion, just like the flat earth has a lot more answers than questions, still many questions, but the globe has a lot of questions. And this is probably going to make somebody flip it right now, but whatever. When I look at the flat earth versus the globe, there's still questions in both, but the globe is so refuted now in my mind that it cannot be that way. I don't know how it is, definitely, without a question or a shadow of a doubt, but I know what it's not. In the same way, I'll say preterism has become in my mind as they don't have all the answers because the scriptures don't have all the answers. But looking at the scriptures through the eyes of those who wrote it, without reading into the text, my studies so far have leaned me on the side of preterism. And I'm not saying that's it, or that anybody else who has another view is wrong. But I will say that all of these things that we're discussing about these verses, about the resurrection, about all these things, these are very much in line with the current majority, which doesn't mean that it's wrong, but everyone that I've ever met is aware of this interpretation of these words. And no matter what conviction someone has, the way they're going to explain their interpretation is, well, I'm just reading what it says. And what that does is that implicates anyone who reads it what it says and concludes on another point differently than what we do, is that we're saying that we're reading what it says. Therefore, if they come to another conclusion, they're not reading what it says. And
well, what someone else wrote. I mean, if you read it word for word, you see the same words I do, just the way someone else has translated it or put it in there.
Yeah, no, I get it, and I'm not attacking you or anything. I'm just.
I understand.
I think it's interesting because what we have to do is, what does it tell us? What does it teach us to do? It teaches us to consider your brother, or to hear the entire matter before making a conclusion. But if we've already arrived at our conclusion, before we ever hear the matter, and all we ever do is try to prove our conclusion, then we're not actually considering our brother. You see, it says, so a man lies down and rises not again, till the heavens are no more. So this right here is saying that when a man dies, he's going to lay in his grave, and he's not getting up until the judgment. When the judgment comes, he's going to come up. That's when he's going to rise. I don't dispute that. What's different here in this idea is that when is the judgment and when is the resurrection? Is it past, present, or future? That's the question. And what preterism does is it explains from a biblical perspective the possibility of the resurrection happening at 70 AD when the judgment came and the return of Messiah, all that stuff. And there's so many different teachings that are found directly in the scriptures that offer a different understanding of the very same verses that we've all come to understand to mean one thing, but actually in retrospect means something entirely different. Because what the popular belief is that the first century believers were mistaken, and they thought that when it said judgment was at hand and it was going to happen swiftly and he would not delay, oh, that meant 2,000 years later, at least to this day now, and they were just mistaken. They were wrong.
Yeah, they thought Yeshua came then to establish the kingdom.
And that's what church teaches us, and that's wrong. I do not agree with that teaching anymore. Here's why. Because how in the world can we, thousands of years later, declare that we have more knowledge and more insight to what these words say than the very people who were inspired to write them? I do not anymore subscribe to that idea, because what that does is that elevates me and my ability higher than those who were inspired to write these words. Not only that, but higher than the spirit that inspired these words to be written in the first place. And if I'm really reading what the word says and taking it for what it says, when it says, I will judge swiftly, I will not delay, in your generation, many of you will still be alive when the judgment comes, that's words that mean something. And if they mean what they say, then that has to be taken into account. It has to. It can't be overlooked, because we can't look at one verse one way and another verse another way. We have to be consistent. And so there is a version of the truth that allows for all things to make sense and to not be conflicting. And I think that the preterist view is causing a lot of other things to line up. And I think that if we don't at least consider it, we can all do what we want. If I don't at least consider it, then I do myself a disservice. Because there's just too much evidence, man. There's just too much evidence. If I see a smoking gun laying on somebody's desk and they're claiming they didn't shoot the person that's laying dead on the floor, I'd be an idiot not to investigate. And I don't want to be that idiot. Not because any person, but because the Father, I believe, has revealed something to a lot of people, and it's up to us to investigate whatever he's revealing to us. If we don't, then he can take it away, and we won't. And then what? So I'm looking at a lot of this stuff, not because Neil's not for any reason, but other than the fact that there are things that I've never considered before, and I want to investigate them from the perspective that the people who hold that view have, and I have to do it that way, because if I investigate these things from my current perspective, then I don't gain anything. I gain nothing. It's like if you have a bowl of chili and it's disgusting, and you don't eat chili again for 30 years, not knowing that everybody makes chili different, and then finally when you're 50, you taste a bowl of chili and you're like, man, this is the best thing I ever had. I've been missing it my whole life. Well, yeah, you big dummy. All chili's not the same.
Wherefore you thought chili was the same.
Yeah. So just because
we have to be as the Bereans and study these things and whether or not they are true.
Yeah, that's all. And I really appreciate your experience, man, because you got a lot of stuff. You're bringing out a lot. I like the Job stuff you brought out. So maybe if when you have time, Niels, if you want, Just throw some scriptures together, man, so that when we get on here, we can just look at all that stuff.
Or maybe you can send us the scriptures before Shabbat so we can, like, anytime within the week. So we'll have time to review those.
Yeah, so we can talk about them and start with them. And you know, because we're never going to get through this book. And it's a short book.
May I just suggest another point of view, possibly, because like, so looking at who is talking here and the audience, you know, so what I see in chapter 12, this is Job talking, right? So this is Job talking, and he was experiencing, at that time, he was experiencing all of these things from God that he felt he did not deserve, right? He was losing everything he had, and then everything he worked for, and then his family, and then he was inflicted with a disease of some sort. Just correct me if I'm wrong. And so he is now talking, making his plea. And very interesting how, you know, verse 7, he was talking about the hope for a tree, the stump, just a lot of interesting things. And then in verse 10, but a man dies and is powerless, and man expires, and where is he? Water disappears from the sea, and a river dries up and is parched, and a man shall lie down and not rise, and so on and so forth. And then he said, if only you would hide me in Sheol, conceal me until your wrath turns away. Set for me a law and remember me. Is it possible that, because whenever we hear the word wrath, we say, oh, it's judgment, it's, you know, but what if this is Job? He was just telling the Father that, oh, it would be better for me to die right now rather than, you know, to be alive and be this miserable. I'm just thinking aloud. And so he's asking, if only you would hide me in Sheol, conceal me until your wrath, because it seems like, you know, you're pouring out your wrath on me with everything, every bad thing that has been happening to me. Until your wrath turns away, just keep me in Sheol like a dead person. And then he says, like, if a man dies, would he live again? And then he said, all the days of my struggle, I wait till my change comes. Like, he was struggling, and he was like, those days were long. Those must have been really miserable, long days of struggle for him. And he was waiting for his change to come. Like, because he knew that, you know how sometimes, like me, when I am experiencing something bad and I know it's my own doing, and I would ask God just to expose darkness in my heart so that, you know, help me to learn this lesson already so that, you know, my misery will end and then I can move forward. Something like that. This is just what I'm thinking right now when I read these words, that there's a possible another explanation coming from Job's perspective and what was happening to him at that time. I don't know. So because the thing is, I still don't see how this is about, you know, because the change will come during, it says, all the days of my struggle, I wait till my change comes. It's like he's still alive and he's waiting for change to come. Not when he's dead and then he will, in a twinkling of an eye, you know, how we're thinking of that transformation from corruptibility to incorruptibility, because I really don't see that here. I don't want to read that into this text. I just want to stick with this text for now. And
okay, I got to tell you, Kay, this thought is not yet developed in this chapter. You got to keep reading all the way through chapter 20.
What thought is not yet developed?
The Job chapter 17 or 16, wherever it is that you're reading, it goes on and on and on through chapter 19 even. He's still having the same conversation. So there's a lot more to it than just what we're looking at.
But this is like, we have to take into consideration, this is Job talking, right? And
Yeah,
talking about his condition, like what he was making a plea for his condition. And who was he talking to? Who was his audience at this time? So we have to set the context. Because like if you look at the chapters prior to that, like chapter 13, he says, it's like he is making a plea from the Heavenly Father to like, withdraw your hand far from me, and let not dread of you make me afraid. Then call and let me answer, let me speak and you reply to me. And he's talking with the Heavenly Father here.
and he continues on past there.
Mm-hmm. But I agree that he's saying that what he's saying is that when man dies, he's powerless, and man expires. Where is he? Like when a person dies, he sleeps. Like he's nothing. That's the end of it. That's the end of for me. That's the end of the transformation. All our chances for redemption, everything else, like it's while we're alive that we can serve the Father, we can obey, we can worship, etc., etc. But after that,
Chapter 17, he starts out by saying, my spirit is broken, my days are extinct, and the graveyard is ready for me. Surely there are mockers about me, and my eye dwells on the provocation. Lay down a pledge for me with you. Who is there who will put up security for me? Since you have closed their hearts to understanding, therefore you will not let them triumph. He who informs against his friends to get a share of their property, the eyes of his children will fail. He has made me a byword of the peoples, and I am one before whom men spit. My eye has grown dim from vexation, and all my members are like a shadow. The upright are appalled at this, and the innocent stirs himself up against the godless. Yet the righteous holds to his way, and he who has clean hands grows stronger and stronger. But you, come on again, all of you, and I shall not find a wise man among you. My days are past, my plans are broken off, the desires of my heart. They make night into day, the light, they say, is near to the darkness. If I hope for Sheol as my house, if I make my bed in darkness, if I say to the pit, you are my father, and to the worm, my mother or my sister, where then is my hope? Who will see my hope? Will it go down to the bars of Sheol? Shall we descend together into the dust? So this to me sounds like he's still talking about the same thing, about being at the end of his days and going into the grave, and his days are extinct, the graveyard's ready for him. And if all he's got hope for is the grave, then where's his hope? There's something other than the grave to hope for.
You mentioned that earlier in chapter 14. Remember, he's talking to these other friends of his, which weren't really friends.
Yeah, the ones that were saying that he'd sinned and caused all that stuff to happen.
Bildad, the Shuhite, I think his name was.
Yeah.
He's two or three different people, and they're arguing back and forth, and they're more or less saying, look, come on, things happen for a reason, but, you need to curse God and die, just like his wife was basically saying. But he was saying, no, things happen for a reason. And life has meaning. And, the Creator is working with each and every one of us for a reason. He's molding and shaping us. And he's not doing it just for nothing. He's doing it for his purpose. Well, life's going to be over. That's true. But, his purpose is he's going to call us again for a purpose, because he's molding us here in this physical life, and there will be a spiritual life to come. But the guys just keep arguing with him over and over again, Now, he does have a little bit of arrogance and righteousness, And that's, I think, why the Creator is working with him, getting him to realize, you know, hey, I'm the one in charge here, controlling everything. So Job's arrogance does answer these other friends of his about what he's going through. It's a good book. They say it's older than Genesis when it was written. Job.
Yeah, I heard that too somewhere.
Yeah, me too. Rob Skiba says it too.
And I have, I've been wondering before, because this is a hard book to read for me. There are many hard books in scripture. But the thing is, like, why would the Father toy with the life of a righteous man? If Job was truly righteous before him, why would he do that? Like, it seemed like he was toying with this man's life just to prove something to the enemy. So that never lined up with how I know of our Heavenly Father. I mean, I don't think he would ever do something like that, right?
Well, I'll tell you something. For me, if this flesh and blood life, this physical reality that we know is the only thing that there is, then that would be a cruel thing for somebody to do. But considering that there may be something else after this that's greater, and if you look at the good in all things, especially in this, that what did Job learn about the so-called friends that he had? They weren't really friends at all. And it took all of that for him to learn this. And what my previous studies led me to was that Job's children, who celebrated each one in their own day, and the house fell on, that they were, and he was praying for them and stuff, they were probably not living the lives they were supposed to live. So that's why they were able to be killed. Because if you remember, the father told the adversary, do what you want, but don't harm the man, right? And that was before he got the sores on his face and stuff. But but he couldn't kill him. He had no permission to kill him, right? So he was still protected. But just as the Israelites, I think, were tested to see whether or not they would follow the Father. And the Father says that he does test his children. I don't know, though. I mean, that to me,
this was not, was this a test, or was this like, it's like he allowed the enemy to do all sorts of things on him?
I think it's definitely a test, because the whole purpose before was that the adversary said to the Father directly that surely he praises you because you give him everything. If you take just one thing away, surely he'll turn away from you and he will curse you. So yeah, it's a test. It's a test to see whether he'll stay true or curse the Father.
I've found this one teaching. This was a while back. Explained. I'll try to look for it again, and I'll send it to you guys and see how, if it fits or makes sense. He said that Job was righteous on the outward, but not in the inward. Like, Father was exposing something in his heart because he wants people to obey him on the heart level, not just doing the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. It's like, do it because you love me, and not do it only because it is right, for the sake. So it seemed like, so this guy explained, like, it seemed like Job was having a heart issue, although everything that he was doing on the outside was very obedient, seemed very obedient. And that's the thing also, that the Father wanted to work in him, because like in his in Abba's speech, when he was talking to Job, he was asking him, like, where were you when I made this? Where were you when I made that? Like, it seemed like he was accusing him of something, like showing him part of him that's not right. So it's like, you don't do these things to deserve something. You know, he probably is doing all these offering sacrifices and obeying, and because he wanted something. He wanted abundance. He wanted blessing. He was going for the blessings, not really loving the Heavenly Father. So probably that's the only thing that the Father is seeing. So he wanted him to get that right, and then he will be right before him. Because at the end, like when Job when he saw that, the blessings were returned to him. Something like that. So I'll try to look for that video. Maybe that can explain it better. So anyway, we have gone on a different trail altogether here, but that's good. That's good. I learned a lot today.
Yeah, I'm looking at Job now. You don't get an answer from the Father until chapter 38.
Yes.
So and keep in mind that these chapters and verses weren't there in the scroll.
What do you mean?
They weren't numbered. It was just the words.
Mm-hmm.
Man put that stuff there so we could find it better. So people could be like, look in Job chapter 38, verse 4, and blah, blah, blah. But in the original inspired scrolls, it was no chapter and verse. It was just the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. To read through all this is kind of like a play, you know, with people talking, like dialogues and monologues and
Yeah. Yep.
Well, that's what the whole Bible is, or scriptures, I should say, because I think the Bible's man-made with just what they want to put in it. There's other books I think that have, or should be scripture, or should be accountable to it, but that's what all of it is. It's man's way of happiness, sadness, stupidity, joyfulness, and the Creator, you know, he made us, and he's telling us, hey, look in this book here, or all these books. We got history, we got lessons learned, we got lessons to give and stuff, and we can learn from it, or we can just say, nah, I'm going to do it my own way, and I'll just suffer for it too. Because he's telling us basically, this is the operating manual for what we humans are. If you want things to go as best as possible, now it doesn't mean it's going to be tootsie bootsy, everything's going to be perfect. You know, Christians aren't perfect, and they're not going to get the blessings, or not all of us going to have money in the bank and stuff, you know. But if we follow his principles and his ways of doing things, surely we'll be blessing. There'll be blessings. But also, he sends rain upon the good as well as gives rain upon those who sin, the sinners. We have to endure to the end with understanding, knowing that, hey, follow this instruction manual, and this works the best for us to make it through what we're living.
Yeah. You know, what's funny to me is in chapter 42, we see Job actually repents. So there was something to what you're saying, Kay, that Job, if you looking back at the stuff I was just skimming through, he had a sense of entitlement, right? Like he was bitter. He even says that the Lord made me bitter. He was bitter because he had a sense of entitlement, because he's doing this, he's doing that, and he should be blessed and rewarded, and all this and all these bad things are happening. So in chapter 42, he says, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is that hides counsel with knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I do not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you make it known to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now with my eyes I see you. But now my eye sees you. My eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes.
Well, we know that he doesn't really see him visually, but he sees and understands from what he's learned. Like the previous.
That's a good thing to point out, because in verse 42:5, he says, now my eye sees you. That doesn't mean my eyes, as in two eyes, but my eye sees you. That's like in his mind and his spirit and his.
Some people read that and say, well, see, it says that no one has seen the Father, but here it says he has.
No.
Well, you have to read it in context. That way we understand it. I agree with you, Michael, on what you're saying there. But he does, even though the first verse says he was perfect and an upright man, and the Father says, hey, evil one, have you considered my servant Job? So we know in the beginning of the book that he said he was an upright and a good man, but still he had a flaw, evidently. And the evil one was trying to bring it about. Yeah, you just take everything away from it and he'll curse you, or he'll really, put you down, kind of thing. We see there where his flaw was, or that his, what can we say, thorn in the flesh, basically, toward the end, when he realizes, that he can't do everything, and that his thoughts and stuff, even though he was blessed and he had all these things beforehand, when they were taken away, because naked I came from the womb, and naked shall I return unto you. It doesn't matter what you're given or what you're possess in this life, the flesh, or the works of the flesh, or desires. It's knowing and understanding the purpose of what life is for him.
Man, listen to this, Niels. I like what you're saying. Listen to this. So we get Job, all this stuff happens to Job. His friends come against him, calling him this, calling him that, saying that he's sinned and he caused all this to happen to him. And what does he do? But he prays for the Father to judge them so that they can be punished for what they're accusing him of, right?
Mm.
Is that the proper response that he should have had to those people? Because if you look in Job 42, he says, and the Lord restored the fortunes of Job. When did he do that? When he had prayed for his friends. Once Job prayed for his friends to be forgiven, and just like we see Stephen praying, just like we see the Messiah praying for those who persecuted him, don't hold it against them, please. They know not what they do. It's mercy for all. Even your so-called alleged enemies, those who oppose you, pray for them. And so when he prayed for his friends, he was restored. And he had twice as much as he had before. To me, that's a big deal.
And we find out later he was given 4 times more.
Yeah, that's a big deal to me.
Plus more sons and daughters and wealth and things, because even though he had it and it became back to him, the friends would look on upon it.
Imagine if I had 4 times what I had. My goodness, I'd have 16 children or 24 children.
Yep.
Man.
But still Job knows and realizes it's not what you have in possession, because it could still be all taken away again.
Yep, it doesn't belong to us anyway. Well, I'm going to wrap it up. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, Mike.